welcome back to It's All Light. I'm your host, Natalie Baugh, and today's guest is Steven Sorensen.
Hey, how you guys all doing?
I'm excited because Steven, I met him at a New Year's Eve party with a bunch of friends, and then we became Instagram friends, and he's traveled the world and he's done all these cool things, and I'm like, whoa. And then he expressed, oh, cool, you have a podcast? Let's talk about it. And here we are. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, first I want to give a shout out to my roommate Austin. He was the one that recommended. He was the one that put me in touch with you to recommend me coming on here. But
Oh,
yeah, I
yeah.
guess the basics about me is my name is Steven Sorensen. I'm from Southern California. I love surfing, swimming, anything that has to do with the outdoors. Moving to Utah, I had to pivot a little bit because there's not so much ocean out here. So I picked up rock climbing. I've also recently I've picked up paragliding this last year,
No
which has been
way.
a lot of fun. But yeah, so besides that, I also love to read. I also for fun I developed my own video games in the Unreal Engine,
Whoa.
and yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Dang. In your form, you said you read a book a week. How do you do that? When do you make time to read?
I've been reading a book a week almost since I was 15 years old. A little secret, my secret to that is so when I was in fifth grade, I lost my hearing. Now that's a story for another time, but a result of that
Hmm.
is I got hearing aids. And
Wow.
by the time I was in high school, my hearing aids had Bluetooth capabilities. So that just allowed me to
Whoa.
stream audiobooks. So
Into
I
your
just
ears.
streamed
That's
them
so
to my
cool.
hearing aids.
That's amazing.
And yeah,
Wow.
that's how I'm able to get through so many.
Yeah. Okay, so quick question if it's not too personal. How did you lose
Go
your
for it.
hearing?
That is a great mystery. We are not sure
Really?
exactly, but I went on a camp out with the Boy Scouts and I was sick and I came back and I couldn't hear. We did
Wow.
MRI scans and everything. There was some fluid in my ears, but I just came back and I couldn't hear. But when I was younger, I did struggle with speech abilities and I did was never good at reading, so there might be a neurological thing that happened, but to this day we're not sure.
Wow. So are you deaf in both ears then?
Yes, I am about so in my left ear I hear three times as worse as the average person does, and then in my right ear I hear about four times as worse. So I'm almost completely deaf in my right ear, but I can still
Wow.
detect sound.
Dang, that's crazy. And you haven't had to learn ASL, right? Because you have your
I
implant.
should learn ASL. I'm just never got around to it. I'm
Well,
too busy and
you're also capable. You don't need it. You're doing great. So nice.
until you get to know me, like I'm pretty good at faking that I'm understanding everything in the conversation. That's something I am working on is to get better at telling people that I didn't understand them. But if you live with me, you'll really see that I
Interesting.
definitely don't hear everything that's said.
Nice. Okay, well, there's so many other things just about yourself that I'm curious about based off of what you filled
Go
out in the
for it.
form. But we'll jump to the meat of what this podcast is about, and that is what do you
Hmm.
light up about?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of different things I light up about, but I think to kind of bring it down, something this year especially that I've really been focusing on is integrity.
Wow.
And I feel like integrity almost gets like a bad I feel like it's very much misunderstood. We almost judge somebody if you have integrity or you don't have integrity. It's almost like a moral thing.
Hmm.
In my opinion, if somebody has full integrity, they'll be walking on water. And I think we should do a better job at detaching the concept of integrity from somebody's worthiness or how good they are as a person, but more approach it from I really do think it's more of like a principle of power, and that's something that
Hmm.
I've really been experimenting with, thinking about, especially over the last couple of years.
A principle of
But
power. Huh.
mhm.
Keep going.
But yeah, besides that, I love people. I feel like every person is some kind of is like has a story to tell. And I guess maybe if you dive one level deeper, I love different perspectives. I feel like reality can only be understood through perspectives,
Hmm.
and but you can only to better understand reality, you have to get more and more perspectives of reality, but you can never get like the full concept like of reality. You can just go and keep getting more and more perspectives on it, and I feel like that just enriches experience. And I feel like people are like a great place to get these perspectives or stories. I feel like
Hmm.
books are also kind of like a conduit to that too.
Totally.
So,
Oh, I like that. It's like I've
um,
heard TED Talks where there's more than a single story about everybody, about every situation, and that helps you shift your perspective on just your look on life and building relationships. So I love that. Have you always been intrigued by this?
I think so. I think since I was young, I was always a very curious kid. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Where do you think curiosity stems from in general? Because I'm also just such a curious person.
yeah, that's a good question. I guess before I answer that, I would like to ask you, Natalie, what do
Oh
you
boy.
define curiosity as?
Mm. I think like it's definitely paired with learning. Like you want to just know why things, you want to know things about people, you want to know, you just like to know things. And
Hmm.
I think that curiosity is just like it expands your mind. So I think curiosity is expanding. It's just kind of an exciting like unknown and you want to figure it out. Like problem solving in a way.
Gotcha. Okay, then with that definition, then let me try. What if I say that curiosity is an awareness of potential unfulfilled?
Whoa.
And that is what drives you to learn because you're aware something is there
Yeah.
and that you are aware something could be there and there's value there, and that's what ultimately pulls you to try to figure out what is there.
Oh, I love your definition of curiosity. That's awesome. But you just asked me a question, or was that just explaining it?
Or that was just trying to like from your definition of curiosity, then that is what I think drives curiosity in someone.
Hmm. Potential. What did you say again? Potential to.
So it's an awareness
Mm.
of the potential of something. So it's you're aware that there is value there, but the value is not recognized. So that draws you. The potential of that value
Hmm.
is what draws you to try to expand and to learn and to figure out what is there.
Whether that's in yourself or in someone else or whatever you're curious about. Wow,
Hmm.
that's so cool. You mentioned that you wrote an article about emotional intelligence. Is that similar? I know intelligent deals a lot with self awareness. So you mentioned curiosity being an awareness.
Um,
How, tell us more about that.
yeah, so maybe to give some background, so I teach as an adjunct professor at BYU. And
Amazing.
so for the last 4 years, my research has been primarily in artificial intelligence. And so I've read a lot of literature behind it, and it's actually been really interesting to see the last 2 years with Gen AI come up. But
Oh,
in
totally.
addition to that, I also did going through recruiting for consulting. I feel like I studied a lot of logic, and there's kind of like two specialties I definitely have expertise in is artificial intelligence and business strategy.
Hmm.
From that, I felt like I was weak in the domain of understanding emotions. So that kind of triggered, I figured, you know what, if I could study logic in this way, why can't I study emotions? And that like
Hmm.
incited last not this last August, but the August before that, I decided I would do kind of an informal lit review where I'd read as many books as I can on emotional intelligence. I found a therapist and I'd meet with her once a
Mm-hmm.
week to kind of apply everything that I learned. And then
Amazing.
this last year, I've just been trying to live as much out of my comfort zone as possible. And that's been like a really cool experience just to kind of see all the literature wrap around that. So
Huh.
that's just some context.
Yeah.
on where that stemmed from. But yeah, I can talk about emotional intelligence all day. What kind of questions or would you have for that?
So, I guess maybe you start with like a definition. What does that look like?
Yeah, okay. So I'll go to Daniel Goldman's definition, and he's kind of the one that pioneered emotional intelligence or the concept. If you've ever
Mm-hmm.
heard that emotional intelligence is more important than IQ, Daniel Goldman's research was the one that proved it. But he defines emotional intelligence as like two different like as a matrix on two different dimensions. And one
Mm-hmm.
dimension is awareness, and the other dimension is management. And so
Wow.
it starts with self awareness and then self management. And then from there, that then builds upon the others awareness and then others management. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions with emotional intelligence is that when we being able to manage others is only the tip of the iceberg, and that's built on this foundation of self-awareness and management. And
Whoa.
we tend to see people that like they're really good at being aware of other people, but they don't have that self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and other people that have very strong self-awareness and self-management, but they don't necessarily have that other awareness of other people. But that second group of people that know how to manage themselves actually have higher levels of emotional intelligence than those people that don't know how to be self-aware and manage their own emotions.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you have to have your own internal emotional intelligence, and then that can help you better understand others and their emotional intelligence.
Right, you need to be able first be aware of your own emotions,
Mm-hmm.
then you need to be able to manage your own emotions. Once
Mm.
on top of that base, then you can start to be more aware of other people's emotions. And from there, you can then help manage other people's emotions.
Wow. Wow. Like help regulate if people come to you and need help, or any arguments or disagreements or something to try to like work through a problem. Wow. Or with coworkers collaborating, there's always two ideas going against each other sometimes. So, wow, that is so cool. So, from my understanding, just little
Mm-hmm.
knowledge of emotional intelligence, I like think of, yeah, just knowing how to understand your feelings and being self-aware. Um, I'm trying to think of like other things I've heard or learned. I really don't know too much about it. But you were saying emotional intelligence is more, I guess, beneficial or important than IQ.
Yes, it's showed that more of more of the variance of success is accounted for by emotional intelligence than IQ. And one of the ways
Hmm.
I see this most commonly, especially with fellow college students, is just are students able to motivate themselves to do their homework? That I think is like one of the biggest indicators to me of emotional intelligence is those students that
Hmm.
know how to manage their emotions and know how to motivate themselves to do homework fare a lot better than those even some of the
Wow.
very smart kids that I know. They can't figure out how to motivate themselves, and that cripples them in the success arena.
Oh, that is so crazy. We talk about this at work all the time too. Like, we don't do any really goals or incentives at work at all. And sometimes I'm like, well, how do we work if there's no like validation and motivation? Because there's books about that too where that's important, but they just stray like far away from that because they want you to be self motivated. And that is something
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with because my ADHD brain and like looking into that, I'm reward, like my brain works based on rewards. Like that's how I get things done. And so it is extremely hard for me to be
Yeah.
self motivated. Um, and I'm just curious how one could work on that.
Yeah, so I think a framework I like about motivation is Eisenberg's two-factor analysis.
Hmm.
If you've taken an organizational behavior class, this is one of the things they'll teach. But the what the basic concept of it is you have to split out. He talks about there's two factors when motivating. There's what he calls hygiene factors, and then there's motivating factors. So the way I like to think about this is the positives and negatives do not add up. So hygiene factors are things that will get you to like leave or to go away from a job. But if they have to be there, like for instance, you have to have good pay, you have to have a non-hostile work environment, all these different things, but they're not going to like motivate you to do work. The other side of it is motivating factors, which are things like you find value in the work you do, you can see like the results of what you're doing, you have some kind of ownership, and these are things that won't push you away from the project, but they're things that, or the company, but they're things that make you want to stay. It's almost like to think about like in a relationship, if you go out on a date, that you would absolutely not go out with a guy that's a serial killer, right? But if you meet a guy and he's not a serial killer, it's not going to make you like more likely. It's not going to better his chances of you going on a second date necessarily. And I think like a lot of people, especially when they are, even if you want to go back to relationships or to the work, is like they try to overcompensate negative hygiene factors with motivating factors, or they'll try to like balance those out, and you can't add them up. They're separate. So that's one of the most popular theories about motivation that's out there.
Interesting. Environment. Yeah, I feel like my work does do a great job with that, and it has increased like just motivation that we're all moving for a good cause and like invested personally, and they invest in your personal life too through different benefits. So I feel like that in turn helps the motivation. Okay, that's really cool. Cool thoughts. I still feel like there's so much I need to learn in that realm though of self-motivation, like sometimes to get myself to do things versus procrastinating, like why we procrastinate in general, versus getting things done. But I always go back to just one thing at a time and things all work itself out. But do you feel like you're pretty good at motivating yourself? Like you seem like you do a lot and you get a lot done.
Yeah, so one interesting thing is I just left a company that I was working for, and I looked back on my time on the company, and there was not a single day that I was bored at work.
Cool.
And one of the things I think that why that works for me is I know I have like a bigger purpose, and then I can tie all the individual things back to my purpose. And it's almost like I see the reward. I see the alignment of the reward. And Stephen R. Covey, he talks a lot about his habit 2 is begin with the end in mind, where you get to like create this vision. There's 2 parts and there's so many different dichotomies about this. I can apply this to strategy in business or just have engineers versus business students and everything. But like you be creative and you create this vision of what you want. And then after you create that vision, this vision should motivate you. It should make you feel good. After you do that, then you move from the right hemisphere, the creative side of your brain, then to the analytical side of your brain. Is like, okay, now that I know I want this, let me break this down and figure out the tasks that I need to do to get this done. And so what I feel like, especially with my own life, is that everything I do, I can track back to my 1 year or my 5-year goals. And if I'm caught in a task that I feel like I can't tie back to my 1 year, 6 month, or 5-year goals, I just completely drop it.
Wow.
So everything I do, I feel that bigger picture
it's connected.
That I'm working towards.
Oh, that is really cool. I think I'm like on the brink of discovering how to do that. This has been like a different year of goals for me. Usually I'm pretty like, I try to be pretty rigid, but this year it's more of just like ideas and a vision, and I'm doing trying to do little things. But I love that, like checking back in and seeing if it goes with what you're trying to achieve. That is so cool. Man, I'm like trying to like formulate some of these questions and look at your form just because there's so much that I'm like, okay, what do we want to learn? And I'm going to go backwards a little bit, and this will help us pull in some more things. Why should others know about this? And I can read what you said too, and then you can build off of that. You said, I think integrity is the ultimate superpower. It is the power to speak and have some things done. Let's see. I don't know if that made sense, but tell me about that. Integrity is the ultimate superpower, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so let's go back to that whole goal setting thing.
Yeah.
When your actions in the present are in alignment with what your goals are, that is integrity. That is having integrity. And you feel the power, you feel the happiness when there is that alignment between what you want to do in the long term in your life and what you're doing in the short term. That brings joy. Where I don't think there's like the most miserable people out there are those that they feel like they're working on something that isn't tied back to what they want to actually do in life. And that is a case where those people don't have integrity because they're in a job or they're in some kind of activity that they said yes to, but isn't in alignment with what their values and what they want to do in life.
Wow. What helps you determine your values? Because I know values are super connected to integrity in general.
Well, yeah, I guess it goes to let's take a step back. So we live in this shared reality where live in this reality that we all share, where there are things that are finite and things that we can both agree on. It's like I can agree on there's a microphone in front of you and that I'm in a room, but we perceive it subjectively and we give things value. You may think that microphone is really special, but I may think, oh, that's like nothing. But that's the way we perceive is how we start to give value to things. And when we give value to things, that's how we kind of start to determine where our values are based off of what do we prioritize over other things. So for instance, you have prioritized this podcast, you value this podcast, you're giving up time that you would probably be spending doing something else for this podcast. That shows that you're allocating value to this. What this probably stems on, there's a deeper why behind why you're doing this podcast. And if you dig down into what that why is of what is causing you to do this podcast, that will show what you value. And so going back to
I like that.
The whole integrity thing, it's like, well, you got to figure out what do you want to be allocating your time to, what do you want to give value to in your life, and then you go forward and you actually allocate value to those things. I don't know if that exactly answered your question or not, but
I think it did. Yeah. And then it's prioritizing and executing from there, if I understood you correctly. Yeah, that's so cool. There's so much that I'm like, I've never really dove into this or dived into this, so it's really cool. The study of logic, intelligence, reasoning, and agency. And then you said you love business strategy because it kind of pulls all of those together and getting things done and orderly. Are you naturally an organized person?
I am not naturally an organized person. I'm actually more of a creative type by nature, but I've disciplined myself on how to be analytical. So that's one of the I guess my differentiators is I can do both the analytic side of things. But and everybody thinks I'm analytical, but if you mentioned you've seen like my Instagram stories, and if you look at me when I was a kid, all my drawings and even my video game passions, I'm definitely natively a creative.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool that we have the power to like you said, like become more analytical or more logical and build our emotional intelligence. And I think in my personal therapy, like we just talk about like little experiences that build off of it. It's like it doesn't all come at once and you have to work at it and like just take in every little experience in your life to build and become more emotionally intelligent, more just able to live a life that's more fulfilling. The more we learn about these deeper things, the more fulfilled we can be, right?
Right.
What would you say is your why? Like, you mentioned you have your 5-year goals and your 1-year goals. Like, I feel like that vision, like you said, begin with the end in mind, is your biggest driving force to learn, to be curious, to develop all these intelligences, right? What do you feel like your why to do all that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, my why, I go back to what covenants that I've made in the temple, but I kind of aggregate those together as progression, or I guess another way I could put it is also like my simple term is to always add value to society. But going to this idea of progression, I split that into 3 different buckets, which is as my own personal progression, the progression of my family, and the progression of my community. And those 3 buckets really do kind of dictate what I should be doing in my life. And for personal development is, what do I do professionally? What do I do like educationally? And family development, I've been wrestling with how do I focus on this. And for me now, right now, it's studying emotional intelligence, working on that, making sure I have that integrity, developing the relationships that I have. And then community development, making sure that I'm setting myself up to give back to the community, or teaching a class at BYU, or hopping on calls with students that need professional advice, or just figuring out where am I in a position to contribute. And so just making sure that everything goes back in alignment with this idea of progressing and adding value to myself and to society at large.
Wow, that's awesome. That is so cool. I love that. Thank you for sharing. You also shared a quote in the form, and I'll read it, and then I would love to hear why you like this quote. It says, it is more important to be true to what you know than it is to know what is true, because the sooner you are true to what you know, the sooner you will find out what you know is not true. Who said that, or is that your own quote?
I forget who said it. I've just kind of developed that saying over the past couple of years. But yeah, I'm curious. What are your first thoughts about that, Natalie?
It's like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. But at the same time, I'm like, wait, no, like there is truth and there's not truth. And then we have to learn the truth. But some things can be true to different people. So I feel like it just gets complicated, because I think there are undeniable, like, especially in like a gospel sense, there are truths that are like unchanging, and you either believe it or you don't, you know? And so then when it's like, well, when you are true to what you know versus, let's see, what did it say? True to what you know than it is to know what is true. Like, I guess it feels like it's backwards. Like you learn what's truth, and then that is true to you. For me. So sorry, it's confusing. I'm like wrapping around. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll pressure test that. So is that what's the pattern in Alma 32 for learning truth?
Is that line upon line? True? Oh, I can't remember.
In Alma 32, it goes through planting a seed.
Oh, that's the faith chapter, right? And you act upon it.
You have this word. Now test it to see if it's true first. And this is where it's going to get to, is I think there is undeniably truth, solid truth out there.
Right.
However, our understanding of truth may not necessarily be correct. And it may not be wrong, it's just might be an approximation, or it might be one perspective. And what I've found is more important is that rather than worrying about knowing what is true, if you think something is true, you act in accordance and you test that out. Because the sooner you do that, the sooner you will find out the extent of how much that is true. If you, for instance, if you're a medical doctor and there is a certain law that's out there that says thou shalt never touch the hearts. Then what you want to do is you want to test that truth. You want to learn all the rules and the laws behind that. And once you fully understand that law and you go down that path, that is when you learn that that is actually not true. And yes, you can touch the heart under these certain circumstances.
Huh. So interesting. So you have to test it, but like truth is truth, and so as you test it, you'll kind of come to resonate on, I guess, having it be true to you, right?
Right. It's like if you go back to the gospel perspective, if you think that reading the Book of Mormon every day is going to bring joy and happiness to your life, then you should better start reading the Book of Mormon every day so you find out, wait, that doesn't just bring joy and happiness to my life. What's going on here? But by doing so, you're going to learn something from there that will reveal line upon line, precept upon precept, the next thing that you should do. But too many people, I feel, just sit back and they hold this truth. Oh yeah, if I read the Book of Mormon every day, I would be happy, or something like that. Or a fun example, when I was 16, I remember thinking that, oh, if I just do 100 sit-ups every day, I would have abs. And then I go into my mission, and my first trainer, he's like, oh, I'm going home really soon. I want to get in good shape. And like, oh, I'm going to show him. So I do 100 sit-ups every day. And then I realized that, wait, what? This doesn't work. And then that leads to this process of experimentation and figuring out, okay, do I need to diet? Am I doing like more strength exercise? And from there, you learn things. It's like going down a career path thinking, I got this revelation that I really want to do X, Y, and Z career. Well, you should act upon it and do it quickly. And then you realize this is not where you want to be. You would choose a major quickly, and then you realize this isn't where you want to be, and then you pivot from there.
Yeah.
You think you have this one understanding of like how things are, but the quicker you test it, that's when you get new information that will show you which way to go.
I love that.
And we do the exact same thing in business consulting, and that's how like the big firms, they're able to get to answers to problems really quickly is by testing the hypothesis and assumptions that need to be true for something to work out.
Dang, that is a business concept I want to think about more. I work in marketing and a little bit of strategy, and that is such a good thing. It's like, what are we testing? Because the quicker we are testing things, then the more we learn and gain knowledge to then pivot, like you said, and keep learning, I guess, the most important things, right? Oh, that's so cool. I also loved in your forum you shared for your like uplifting takeaway, just you personally, is that like through all these trials there will be errors too, and you were saying like there's so many ups and downs that comes when you're growing, yet you can still find joy, like even if you are like miserable, depressed, or anxious, like there's some way to find. I love that you said you may find excitement for what this experience may make of you. And I thought that was so beautiful. How have you seen that in your own life?
Yeah, well, I think you have to go through a couple cycles. I think that's number one, is you have to see that life has these ups and downs and understand that there's seasons in life. And once you see like, okay, a winter comes and things are really miserable, but then spring's right around the corner, you can start to anticipate that spring while you're in winter time. And I think what that has turned out for me, how I recognize that, is it's like this meta sub feeling that I get sometimes where I'll be completely miserable and I'll be going through a really hard time and life just sucks so much. But I have like this deeper feeling, and this feeling is like a very quiet feeling, and it's a feeling that it's not a feeling that makes you want to jump up or go out and do something or just completely vent or let out your stress. It's like a feeling that's completely detached from pushing you to action at all. But it's like a small feeling that just is like, hey, yeah, this all sucks, but this is awesome. Like, I can't wait to see like what comes out of that. And I think just really observing, I think two things is one, respect the cycles. You're not going to be able to go through life with it being completely joyful. Like, understand that's just not how growth works.
Right.
But then number two, recognize the cycles. Is if you can do those two things, don't fight against it when a hard time comes. And I think coping is great, but only cope if it's necessary. If you can go without coping and just feel the emotion and feel the discomfort, allow yourself to experience that. And in that, when you go through that, you become stronger, and then you come out of it better. Learn how to really appreciate the experiences. And I think that turns into that deeper joy that is ultimately what I find more fulfilling.
And that builds your emotional intelligence, which therefore allows you to help others, because we're all going through it. We're all going through the ups and downs. And I feel like I keep getting pounded with, and this is how we can help others, It's so cool. I love to hear you talk about this. Wrapping up, is there anything from today's episode or just pressing in your life that you want to end on?
Yeah, well, I'll shoot that back at you, Natalie, but what do you think are some of the key highlights or takeaways from everything we've talked about so far? What have you found most interesting?
I think just remembering some of the basics, I've taken 7 Habits, seminars, and, the begin with, end in mind, I think we're too easy to forget kind of our end goal. I mean, there's, the end goal of life in general, and from a religious perspective, it's to return to God, right? And that is so fun to focus on, and I feel like church and scripture study and callings, that all helps with salvation and exaltation. There was a talk I listened to, and it was, this lady talking about okay, making it to the celestial kingdom, and maybe she's 50 years old, and she's yeah, I'm halfway there, I'm doing good. And then her bishop was well, what if you died tomorrow? And she's oh no, I'd only make it to the mid-terrestrial, or what, I don't know, whatever she said, but I was just whoa, that's so true. By the end of our lives, we're still not going to be yay, we made it, it's just this ongoing process. If we were to die tomorrow, would we make it to the celestial kingdom? How are we living now that sets us up for that pattern and celestial thinking, So that's been on my mind for broader a broader sense of vision and how I want to live my life. But I feel my other takeaway is just doing the daily things I need to do to improve my emotional intelligence in general, and let that be a template for other areas in my life, especially relationship building in work, because that takes up a lot of our time, and then letting that just springboard me into better things. I don't know. I still have a lot. I'm going to listen to this over and over again because I still have a lot I want to think about. But yeah, thank you for asking me. That was awesome.
Yeah, just to kind of end on that, I finished reading Clayton Christensen's book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And I try to read this book once a year.
That's amazing.
And one of the things that he says at the end is he talks about that we all have to figure out, with the begin with the end in mind, is what metric are we going to use to measure ourselves? Mm-hmm. He talks about when he gets to the celestial kingdom, what he's going to tell God is how he's going to measure his life, and he's decided for himself that it will be the individual people that he was able to contribute to, or that he was able to help out. And that doesn't necessarily need to be it for everything. Mm-hmm. But I do think, as you talked about that, just figuring out what is that end goal that you want. Mm-hmm. And then you talked more about, to get to that end goal, I need to develop my emotional intelligence or do these day-to-day things. But figuring out, how am I going to evaluate myself? What do I value? And then how can I get there? And to make sure that's all in alignment, having that integrity.
Wow. Full circle. Look at that. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And I'll leave your Instagram so people can probably DM you more questions. I feel like this sparked a lot in me that it's okay. Yeah, and I'll probably text you with questions later too. Just tell me more about this, or send us your emotional intelligence article, and just the business side of things too. It's so fascinating to piece it all together. So thank you again for your time, and everyone for listening. We hope you have a great rest of your week, your month, your year, and hopefully you can take something from this episode. So we'll talk to you all next week. See you later.